Next slide, please. Okay, for those of you that are new to Webex, I just wanted to point out the Webex panel, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. You can use the chat window to send a message to the organizer or to myself or the speakers, and please use the Q&A window to enter any questions. During the webcast, please enter your questions as they come up, and we will take periodic pauses during the webcast to answer any questions that have been asked, and we'll also ask for more questions at the end. Next slide. Okay, the picture is of me, so I think most of you know that I've been doing J.D. Edwards for a few years, and we specialize in J.D. Edwards training. We publish J.D. Tips Journal, and we also publish and sell our training manuals to those of you that don't have the opportunity to come to classes. I want to introduce MarketSphere briefly before I turn this over to Greg Davis. Greg and I go back a couple of years, and I've been very impressed with MarketSphere. They share similar values to the values that I feel we have, so they are a great fit with us. And Greg is a very experienced J.D. Edwards consultant, as is Seth. So I'm going to turn this over to Greg to talk a little bit more about his background, and we'll proceed with the webcast.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sharing part of your afternoon with us. Real quick bio on myself. Again, I'm Greg Davis. I am our current J.D. Edwards Practice Director at MarketSphere. I've spent the past 14 years in the consulting industry focusing on the J.D. Edwards suite specifically, and I've done that through Anderson, IBM, PwC, and I've spent the last 6 years at MarketSphere, and done everything from implementations to upgrades, expanded footprints, complex integrations. You'll see some of my description there mentions some edge product integration with J.D. Edwards, Oracle Transportation Management, advanced planning, and production scheduling. But I have full experience in really the three major suites, the financials, the distributions, and the manufacturing suites of J.D. Edwards. Also joined today by Seth Chaikin. He's a senior manager in our J.D. Edwards practice. As his bio shows there, he has over 13 years of consulting. And he's done a lot of ERP work in his time, and the recent history experience Seth has and why he's on this call too is he's got some good E1 to E1 upgrade experience and some world to E1 upgrade experience. So I wanted to make sure we had the whole audience covered here, world customers and E1 customers. Everyone felt welcome and could hopefully learn something from this. We also have Mike Mormon with us. Mike Mormon is on the phone as well. Mike really leads the technical arm of our J.D. Edwards practice, so anything related to infrastructure, DBA, or CNC development, Mike's on as well. So again, we want to make sure this session today is value added for everyone, whether it be functional questions that you might have or technical questions. We hope we can answer them. So I think we'll go on to the next slide. So just piggybacking on what Andy shared, I think there is a lot of consistency between J.D. Tips, Andy Klee, and MarketSphere, really. I think there's a common culture in place. There's a lot of synergies there, and I'll be brief on this, but we have formalized an alliance to really enhance the offerings that we can provide customers. I think J.D. Tips, as everyone knows, offers world-class training and world-class knowledge capital that has helped J.D. Edwards customers for years, and it should be noted that MarketSphere has been a customer of J.D. Tips for a long time, and it's helped us get through a lot of our tough projects, and I think everyone has nothing but positive feelings about the documentation that they produce. And they also have provided, very solid project augmentation and consulting services on projects. I think where we see most of the synergies is that MarketSphere can continue to offer our implementation and upgrade services, but we can also utilize JDE tips to help with some of the training, the professional training and the professional documentation that's needed, especially for these upgrade type projects that really focus on net change and user acceptance. Andy, did you want to add any more to that, or are we good? Okay. So real quick background on this presentation. The history of this started when we've done some E1 to E1 upgrades in the past couple years, and we've done some World to E1 upgrades. We also have a lot of colleagues. As you guys know, it's a small world out there, and we all kind of rely upon each other, and it's a strong user community. We do have friends and colleagues in the industry that have tried to do upgrades on their own as well that we are close with, and so we have a little bit of lessons learned about what to avoid and some best practices on what to make sure you do conduct in these projects. And we just wanted to share that. Now is a good time to do that. It's a good time to pause and reflect because we know a lot of you are on World, some of you are on E1, and you're thinking about upgrades right now, right? It's the right time to be thinking about an upgrade. And so we thought we'd just share some information with you and use the JDE Tips Webucation to do that. We thought we'd section this to have a paramount communication here. I want to make sure we tell you why we segmented this the way we did. We have pre-upgrade activities because I think too many times we've heard that people are just throwing themselves straight into the upgrade. And we think it's important to let you know that there are several activities that need to and should be done before the upgrade even starts to make sure you're successful and to mitigate risk during your actual upgrade. So we have a section on the pre-upgrade activities. Then we'll get into the critical upgrade activities and some pros and cons and some best practices and lessons learned in the critical upgrade activities section. And then we'll talk about a summary. We'll bring it all together. And at the very end, I'll share a little bit more about MarketSphere. And again, Seth and I and Mike will be talking, so you'll see all of us. I know you don't have a face to the name. We didn't include our pictures because none of us are as pretty as Andy Clee, so we just wanted to avoid that. But we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll start with the why upgrade. We will be brief on this, but I think it's important. Again, these are all based on lessons learned, but the importance of knowing why you're upgrading. We don't just upgrade for the sake of upgrading. You all know the reasons. Some of you are probably on the business side, and some of you are more on the technical side. But either way, you're aware of some of the reasons why you're upgrading. So understanding the reason and making sure it's known throughout the organization is important because it can apply focus to the project, drive attention to the areas that are most important. It'll also help you identify the project methodology that you need to take. There's several different ways to skin the cat here on the upgrade, so we'll talk through that a little bit more in the actual upgrade section. To determine ways to measure the benefits to be achieved, the old adage, you can't improve what you can't measure. We need to make sure if you understand the reason for your upgrade, you'll be able to measure the benefits that need to be achieved. This also needs to be agreed upon by the business process owners in the IT department. Too often we have upgrades being executed and taken on by the IT group only, and it becomes an IT project and an IT issue. And really talking about business process owners, I know that's a commonly used term, so a lot of companies out there think they have that structure defined, but when it comes down to it, they really don't. An upgrade project or an implementation becomes the issue of the IT department, and it's a project that they need to complete on time. And when we say business process owners, we're talking about a process like, let's say, order to cash that has within it functions like sales order, logistics, accounts receivable. All those are functionals that need to have functional area leads within that business process. So, again, having that agreed upon understanding between your process owners and your IT ensures that you have full buy-in, and it's driven from both sides of the company. You have a cross-functional team making sure everybody's concerns and all processes are accounted for, including the IT components. And then the last major bullet on this slide says most companies have multiple reasons for upgrading, but one primary reason that outranks the rest, and that needs to be understood. I think, there's a lot of different reasons, from even eliminating customizations. Some are listed there: new functionality, technology stack changes, lack of support, bug fixes. There needs to be a main driver just to make sure we're consistent with our guiding principles. And, an upgrade may cover all of those things. We may address them all, but knowing the reasons why helps to focus on the key drivers. I think anymore, just my 2 cents is from the people we're talking to and the companies we're working for, they're realizing that a lot of their business pain comes from being highly customized, and I'm not sure if anybody on the phone is in that same situation. But the way we've customized ourselves, and lends itself to actually business process issues. Sometimes the business process owners and the functional leads think that there's a problem with the software. It's really not. We customize it to meet their needs, and that's had a residual negative impact on other areas of the software. So moving on to the next slide there, identifying business value. Many of you have gone through this as a part of your business case or your ROI exercise. And I won't get into our ROI tools or anything like that, but it is important to understand the strategic map or the strategic reasons to upgrade. We've listed a few on there. And, a lot of people can talk to the strategic drivers for why they're upgrading, but they need to understand the impact. So the second column there is the most important column. When we talk about decreasing the volume of customizations, a lot of folks don't even know what customizations they have, or they've had enough turnover. The impacts of those customizations, you need to understand what the result is if we add or remove or change those customizations. So there really needs to be almost like an as-is or to-be analysis done on those. Increase employee productivity. It's important to know that J.D. Edwards has grown tremendously. I know a lot of you that have been around J.D. Edwards for a while know that some of the older releases, it took them a while to make a lot of ground and functionality and usability. But these latest releases are just getting better and better, and the tools releases that are out there now really take advantage of the user experience. And that's important to note that will actually impact employee productivity. Take advantage of new J.D. Edwards capabilities. Every release has new functionality, and we'll talk more about it later, but you need to understand the net change, right? You need to understand the net change from the release you're on to the release you're going to and how that's going to impact processes. And one thing we found that's been beneficial to that is actually have custom net change training, so not training based on the modules and all the functionality, the standard courses you would take, but to actually have net change training and to really address the process improvement areas. And we've worked with Clee Associates and J.D. Tips on that. And J.D. Tips has provided a lot of the training for net change on some of our upgrade projects. Web architecture, that goes without saying, the impacts of upgrading that are listed there. And business ownership of ERP. So I alluded to that earlier. I think it's commonplace that, a lot of people think, well, ERP, J.D. Edwards, for you in the IT side of the world, that's your system. That's you're at fault, or you're to blame for everything, and that's really not true. We're trying to make sure now's the time at an upgrade where business ownership of ERP is paramount, and ERP is it's not an IT-only system. ERP is a way of doing business, and the business needs to understand that side of it. And there's a point on there about metrics. I think what data is important, or what data is of the most importance to the business, and then how do we get that? So, too often, companies will say, give me what the system does and we'll make it work, or something of that nature. Well, really what it needs to be is tell me the metrics. Tell me your metrics. What's the key information you need on a daily basis or a frequent basis or periodic basis, and we will set up the system to obtain those metrics. So in business ownership also just enforces that you have a prioritization of tasks. There's a method to the madness if the business is involved. So that's it on the identifying business value. We'll move on to the upgrade benefits.
Yeah. Now, there are lots of benefits to upgrading. We've listed the ones here that we think are really kind of the critical ones that are the most important. As everyone knows, J.D. Edwards is always adding new modules to the system or adding new functionality to existing modules, and those give you a lot of opportunities when you go to upgrade, either to remove customizations in the system that you have, to optimize business processes that you had workarounds in place due to something that didn't work the way you wanted in the past, or to integrate better with your customers or suppliers through some of the self-service modules. A couple examples of those would be capital asset management, which has been vastly changed since some of the early releases of the software, flex accounting, which is now available in most of the releases, but still not necessarily a fully functional in world, enhanced approval routing, workflow capabilities, and as I mentioned, the self-service modules, which now give you a much better ability to integrate with customers and suppliers, or even with your own employees through employee self-service, and to cut down on calls and interaction with customers and suppliers if you can, and to automate that where you can do it. Now, it also gives you quite a bit in terms of enhanced inquiry and data analysis capabilities. Those of you familiar with DBU or UTB, which were in World and the older versions of E1, know how difficult it was to get in there and look at data in the tables and really get a good feel for, or do some good analysis in there. The data browser now gives you a lot of that functionality with some of the same grid formats and export capability that you have in the functional J.D. Edwards modules, and it really allows you to open some of that data browser access up to some of your employees and super users, and even allows you to apply security on it, where in the past you couldn't necessarily do that on DBU or UTB. The ease of creating your custom reports and batch jobs. I know we always talk, keep customizations down as much as possible, but there's always a lot of custom reports that are created, batch jobs and other custom, objects that are needed just to help manage the business. But it's much easier to do that in the E1 reporting tools than it was in RPG. Part of that is a lot of that content is, I'll use the word pre-built, where you don't have to spend as much time writing code, and you can focus much more on the business requirements than on the technical side of writing that report out. And the RDA tool and E1 is just much more efficient and user-friendly from a developer standpoint. The ability to allow access to remote users. For a lot of World customers, it's difficult to provide that access out to your user base. But once you are on an HTML-based system, most people have web access, and you can give them access from there. It's much easier to roll out changes and to give people access into the system, where instead of in the past maybe where you're running a massive load of reports on the scheduler every night, sending them out all over the company, you can give your people the ability to go in and run those as needed and cut down on some of that load. One of the things we see often with a lot of our customers or clients is they've developed custom third-party web applications to make up for some of the places that J.D. Edwards on the World side doesn't satisfy what they need. Examples would be, we've had clients that create an inventory interface or a web-based system so that they can submit in some of that data from the field, where once you upgrade to a newer version, you can retire some of those custom web apps and cut down on some of the management and maintenance that you need to do there, and instead manage all of that through your E1 system. And there's also quite a few business management opportunities. Most companies, as you go through your initial implementation, you've probably identified some business owners and had some super users in place. Well, over time, they may have left the company or moved on to another position, and it's very hard to replace that knowledge. So this gives you an opportunity to reestablish that ERP operating group with your process owners, your functional leads. It's a great opportunity to train new users, retrain old users, teach them not only the new functionality, but remind them of ways they could have done things in the system. I can't tell you how often we go out to clients who are using complicated workarounds strictly because they didn't know that something had been there all along that they could have used. And this is a great opportunity to identify some of those. It might not even be something new in the system. It's just something that was there all along, and now we're showing them, and it's a great opportunity to get rid of some of those problem points. And, of course, it gives you the longer support time frame. Definitely one of the reasons that a lot of companies look to upgrade is they're out of support and they're still running into issues, or they customize so much that they can't take ESUs. And by upgrading, we can take advantage of that opportunity, one, to get rid of those customizations and apply all those old ESUs that you need, as well as get back on a normal support timeline and have the support you need going forward.
Okay. So we're going to pause and poll the audience here. If any of you have any questions, feel free. Again, you can enter those into the Q&A box on the bottom right of your screen. We'll wait just a second, see if we got any that come through. Again, that was just the why upgrade. A lot of that is information you guys know. But before we dive into the pre-upgrade pros and cons and lessons learned and best practices, I wanted to pause. Okay? We'll keep moving. At any time, if you want to ask a question or submit a question, feel free to do so, and we'll periodically check them. So as we get into the pre-upgrade activities, again, it's important to note that a lot of this is planning and execution, but we're going to talk first about the planning and the pre-upgrade activities. Hard path, I'll start there. Converting to a software release that is not the latest. A lot of that has to do with timing. Some of that has to do with your preference, right? A lot of people don't want to be the first one to beta test, so to speak, a new release. And what I would encourage you to understand is that that's not the case so much anymore with JD Edwards. I do see the value in the latest releases, and each release is getting the best of the functionality. So only involve IT in the upgrade planning and preparation. That's key because, we talked earlier about involving only IT as an IT project, but even in the planning, so even before the project starts, we need to make sure we have process owners in place to help. Another mistake or the hard path to upgrade is retaining all your old or corrupt historical data. We'll talk a little bit about archiving, but that's an area where you have to address what you're going to do before you start going down the path of upgrading. Ignoring current pain points or process inefficiencies. One thing we found is a definite best practice is in the planning or in the pre-upgrade phase is to make sure you collect a list of the pain points from all the end users. And I know some of you are probably thinking, oh, that'll be great. I'll just obtain a list of about 1,000 things that I won't be able to fulfill on. But it really is a best practice, and we'll talk a little bit about why as we go down this presentation. But there's some other things you can do after you obtain that list that can help you complete a successful upgrade. Leave end users out of the process. Again, even if you have business process owners and functional area leads identified, don't forget about the end users. They need to understand what's this mean to them. And I think one thing even we failed in communication plans in the past is to make sure we understand the end user and let them know long before this comes, periodically throughout the project, and even in this case, before the project, here's what this upgrade means to you as an end user, here's how it's going to potentially impact you, and here's the input we need from you to make this a success. Assuming all users are adequately trained on the current processes, Seth mentioned that earlier, that's definitely a mistake you don't want to make in the pre-upgrade phase. It's now the time to pause and reflect and take a look at the process areas that are causing the most pain and really, like we mentioned, take a look at a training plan that maybe includes some net change training. The next bullet is assuming all objects will port over successfully. That's definitely not the case, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. A lack of understanding around all reports, interfaces, conversions, or enhancements, and the next one is a lack of inventory of those objects and their frequency of use. So a lot of folks, when they go into an upgrade initiative, they think they have a good understanding of their inventory of these RICE, what we call RICE components, but they really don't. And then not only that, but they don't understand the frequency of use, who's using them, who owns that report. And I think that's one of the key things we can stress to you is every report should have an owner, and we need to be able to, somebody that's accountable, that's still with the company and understands why that report is useful and how often we are running it. Don't review and assess security. So there's definitely certain little specific gotchas that always come to bite in upgrades. Like if you have row security, for any of you that have security down to the row level and you have it restricted on certain fields or data items, row access on administrator roles, little things like that will really bite you if you have any of that row access set up for some of those roles when you do upgrade. So now's the time. That was just one example, but now's the time before the upgrade starts to review and assess security. Moving on to the easy path, some best practices, so to speak, on the pre-upgrade initiatives. As we mentioned, identifying the process owners and functional area leads. You're going to hear that throughout this presentation, and hopefully that resonates with you and your company. The upgrade project will not be a success unless you have the business participation, and that's the key thing we're trying to get out of this. Review and or create current business process flows. So a couple times we've done upgrades. The companies have had as-is or current state process flows, and other times they have not. Well, you need to have those in place before you start your upgrade. That would be the ideal scenario, and now's the time to create those business process flows or put more accountability on the business to create those before we start the upgrade process. Identify opportunities to redesign business processes and utilize new functionality. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the impact and the net change with an impact assessment that's down the list a little bit. But really we need to understand, the business needs to understand what new functionality is available to them, and potentially any proof of concept exercises might need to take place. So we've had several times with clients before they've upgraded, they've heard or they've seen in documentation on Oracle that, I've heard that there's new functionality around, government project costing, something like that. Well, just assuming that, you could take advantage of that would be just that, making an assumption. Sometimes you would need a proof of concept. A lot of times companies we've dealt with have dealt with improvements in ship confirmation or EDI or freight management, some of the things like that, or order fulfillment, areas like that. Well, it might be beneficial to get the business engaged before the upgrade actually starts and do a proof of concept exercise with them in that new environment. Understanding the net change and releases, we talked about that. There is some documentation that's out there. There's the release notes, the net change documentation, the statement of direction, those type of Oracle docs. There's also a net change tool and a net change report that we can run for you that takes the current release you're on to the latest and greatest release you're going to, and identifies the areas that have changed and what needs to be addressed or at least looked at. And that's a great tool for those that haven't seen that. Identifying the pain points in each area. Okay, we talked about that earlier. One thing that we have found as a best practice is you have a list of pain points. Well, as we mentioned, obviously that's not a great thing to get from the user community, because you'll probably get things like, I can't sign in, or something like that. Obviously, we throw those out, right? But the pain points in each functional area need to be inventoried by functional areas so they can be addressed by those functional area leads. And really, what we turn that into in a pre-upgrade initiative is you take those pain points and you transition it into an upgrade blueprint document that we'll talk about later. But really, those pain points could be anything, and we have options for each of them. So one could be, that they go away with new functionality. Others could be that's something that's going to have to be incorporated with in future phases. And another one could be, it's something that we can address in this upgrade with new functionality, or it's obsoleted. But we turn that into a blueprint for the actual upgrade project, so it becomes a guiding principle for us. It becomes our plan of attack for the upgrade. As we mentioned, review security, identify training needs and tools that are going to be used for training. Send out an end-user survey and analyze the results. I'm really surprised. We've done this a few times, and the amount of valuable information we obtain from the end user. We have polled about 50 end users from the organization before we start an upgrade, and we ask them everything about how they like communication from a communication plan standpoint on the project, to your training needs, to your system experience, your user experience. And we have a standard questionnaire that we've given out, happy to share, but really it comes down to their feedback to that really allows you to put together a communication plan for the whole project that's very valuable and productive. Been very happy with the results of those end user surveys. Initiate the impact assessment. So again, too many companies we see are struggling with the upgrade because they just throw themselves into the upgrade. They think it's more tactical when it's really the majority of an upgrade is the strategic side of it, and that's what we're trying to communicate today. The impact assessment is what's the impact to my business, and not only the impact on my processes, but what's the impact on my interfaces. Most of you have third-party interfaces that you have to integrate with, to all your reports, to all your enhancements. There is an impact assessment, and that's some of the things we provide to help clients understand what's going to be the impact of this pending upgrade. The customization analysis, the next slide I'll get to in a little bit, talks through some sample metrics on, again, going back to a lot of clients today are figuring out, hey, a lot of this pain is really caused by how customized I had to get to meet the business's requirements. And there's some key metrics that you want to know the diagnostics on your customizations before you start the upgrade. Analyze your current reports and interfaces. So really take an inventory, because a lot of these things are going to have to be planned for when we upgrade and test and retrofit. You're going to need to know which ones are high, medium, and low from a level of effort standpoint to even retrofit these. Create a high-level project plan, a realistic expectation of duration based on detailed analysis. One thing we've done, we didn't plan for this, but a lot of customers had called us and asked, well, how long should I plan for or budget for my upgrade? And really that's kind of an interesting way to think about it, but you really have to take a look at more how many reports do you have, how many interfaces do you have, how many other just enhancements or modifications do you have, what's the company's belief on training, as far as retraining. What about new processes? Are you going to take advantage of new functionality, or is it going to be a technical-only upgrade? There's a lot of questions we have. We have a duration tool that we use to help clients understand that. That just takes them through a list of about 12 questions to try to give them an approximate duration based on best practices and what we've seen. So just understanding that sometimes helps, because a lot of times you'll get the business, those in IT, you'll know that the business will say, okay, go ahead and upgrade, we'll give you 3 months. And you realize that it's just not a realistic expectation sometimes. Evaluate table archiving options and tools. Again, this is very important for those that look at your table size currently and see how big your key files, your 911, your 411, 4211, those files can grow and grow, and you need to address those because those will all impact your migration. And complete an architecture diagram of current and future. So a lot of times, especially for those folks going from World to E1, you will know that your architecture and your infrastructure will potentially change, and you need to understand that. We've seen a lot of folks just dive into that without doing that. There's new processing options, some bullets that aren't on here I want to make sure everybody's aware of. There's new processing options, that call interactive jobs in the latest E1 releases. Those all need to be addressed in your planning or your pre-upgrade initiatives. Everything that touches JDE needs to be addressed. I can't say that with enough emphasis, but everything that touches JDE from interface, inbound or outbound, needs to be addressed. An environments plan, is just another thing that needs to be is a best practice for, a lot of you have 3 environments, dev, test, and prod, and some of you have, you call your test PY, or you have QA, or you have a, regression test type environment. Either way, you need to have a plan for each one of those environments, because an upgrade, you can take some different approaches. You can have, you can utilize your dev environment to just bring everything up from your past release and then do some retrofitting and testing. And then you can have a sandbox or PY environment that's there that's more pristine in nature without your customizations, so that you can actually do some of those proof of concept exercises or do some testing or take advantage of new functionality without the damaged goods that you brought up. So there's a plan, that you see where I'm going with that. There is a plan that you can take, being proactive about your upgrade to utilize those environments. So the next slide has just a sample of that customization analysis tool that I talked about. Again, the area of most pain that we've talked to customers about was how customized they were and how to be proactive about that. There are some metrics that you can get out of the system. We have some tools that just take a look at all of the customizations you have and can track this by looking at these lists of 9 or 10 metrics. These are just a sample list of these. You can get a sense for, by knowing this, you can much more effectively plan for your upgrade. If you know the customizations that are made obsolete via the upgrade, we've definitely had every one of our customers that's upgraded has had at least one customization go away due to the upgrade. Customizations that will require modifications. So again, you built a customization that looked at standard code. That standard code might have changed or improved since your latest release for those that have a few releases in between. Like say you're going from 8.0 to 9.0 or even 8.9 to 9.0. There's some things in the middle there. There's still some adjustments that need to be made to those customizations. Understanding which ones will port to 9.0 with minimal retrofitting. Understanding which ones of those will not port to 9.0 where there's actually errors in the merge. I mean, these are things you can be proactive about. You can find this out before you actually do it. Standard objects that would not port over to 9.0 due to customer updates. So lots of times we have, and you're not alone if you're in this boat, and I think you know that, but you've made changes to a standard object in J.D. Edwards. Well, there's a way to easily flag those before they come over so we can build a plan around that. And customizations that will require a business process change in order to obsolete the object in 9.0. So this is a little bit more subjective. This takes a little bit more work, but it's something we've done and it is doable, where you actually can understand the processes that the business utilizes and you can recommend alternatives. So that's one thing that a third-party consulting firm can help you with, is to understand, you can get rid of those customizations if you make a change to your process. And not only that, but maybe here's a couple changes you can make, and here's one we'd recommend, or here's one that would be less intrusive to your business. And then the last three on there are just understanding the customizations that take a high level of effort for retrofitting, medium, and low. It's important to dissect those. I can't stress that enough, because you don't want to just assume in your upgrade project that all your retrofitting activities are going to take the same amount of time. That's not true. There's a lot of development items that are much more lengthy of duration to actually retrofit, and that's what those customization analysis tools can help obtain.
Yeah, and we wanted to hit a couple of the World to E1 specifics here, and not necessarily World to E1 in terms of you're always going from World to E1. There are plenty of upgrades that are World A7.3 to World A9.2, or E1 8.9 to E1 9.0. We know there's a lot of within the same family there or across, but some of these are some of the more important points that you might need to take into account. The first one here, world customers conduct an IT skills assessment. Very important. If you're going from world to world, there's going to be some effort to retrofit some of the objects and some of the reports. And nowadays, RPG programmers are becoming harder and harder to find. So if you need to have some of that work done, it's good to get on the lookout for an RPG for those types of skill sets early on. Another important one there is when you're going from world to E1, the CNC function is quite different. All of the security that gets set up, the menu set up, there's quite a few differences on the technical side that you really need some good CNC support. And a lot of times what we've seen clients do with that is keep their existing database administrator on the world side, or what would be a CNC type role, and then bring in someone else to help out until they can get up to speed and really get to where they know what they're doing well. There's just a big learning curve there on the technical side. Another item there is to really analyze your world writers, dream writers, and fasters and determine which are going to need to be recreated. If you're on World and you're like most companies, you've probably got thousands of those out there. Probably quite a few of them were used once, maybe twice, and then never used again, but they're still there. And the pre-upgrade is a great opportunity to go through there, as Greg mentioned earlier, to assign an owner and to really identify, well, which of these do we need, how much of an effort is it going to be to recreate it, and what do we need to do to get them up there. Currently, they do not migrate as part of the migration process. Oracle has been working on a batch job upgrade tool to move those, and it was really primarily focused on fasters. To date, I don't believe that it works as well as it could. So there's still an effort there that we need to go through and look at those. And it's also important because a lot of those are key reports, especially some of those fasters that go out and update data, and some of those dream writers are really critical reports to the business. So you can't just assume, hey, we're going to take them all, because you're going to get a bunch. You're going to end up doing a lot of work for reports that no one uses. And you can't just say, hey, we don't need them, we'll just go with what's in E1, because there's some of them that you will need. And as we all know, while E1 does have a lot of standard reports, there's always more that are needed. I've never worked with a client where we didn't customize or create several custom reports. Now, not to drive this one home too much, I know we've already talked about data integrity, but it's always good to look at your old, and corrupt might not be the right word. I'm sure everyone's data is in pretty good shape, but you want to make sure that if during that process you look at your data archiving opportunities. If you've got, like a client we worked with recently that had 8 million records in the Cardex, that's going to cause some performance issues, not only during the migration with the time to move it up, but once you get into the new system and you had people over HTML trying to do queries on a table that has 8 million records in it, it's going to take much longer than if we went in and did some data optimization and archived some of that stuff off. Now, a couple of the next ones are more on the technical side, so I won't get too detailed on there. Unicode may be needed if you're on a release of 8.10 or prior, where there were some of the C business functions or C that'll need to be addressed. And then make sure that when you set up your new environments, you're doing a good data refresh from production so that you've got good data to work with going forward. And then another one there that we've seen is kind of a gotcha, is to identify the pristine data or demo byte data that needs to be removed versus what should stay. It's not uncommon for someone to go in and just delete everything, assuming it's all demo data, and accidentally delete out some of the key UDCs or document maintenance files, or just some of that data we need out there. And then it's a process to go back and rebuild some of that. And the last comment there is really to train users on navigation changes when you're going from world green screens to or the E1 client version to HTML. It's a pretty big difference in navigation, especially from world to E1. You've got mainly users who are used to using function keys and tabbing through, and now they need to use a mouse, and the function keys, although we have hotkeys, they're quite a bit different. And it's a pretty large learning curve. So as part of the pre-upgrade, you can start getting some of the common foundations type of navigation training in front of the users and getting them prepped for that. It'll help make the actual upgrade go much smoother and easier.
So I think we've got we want to make sure we're sensitive to time. We know we're going to keep moving here. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A section. I'm going to move on to the upgrade activities for the actual upgrade. So we've been talking about pre-upgrade. Now we're going to transition over to upgrade activities. As far as the hard path, the things to avoid, people who take the hard path typically convert many years' worth of data. I think we've told you that that's not something that's a best practice here. They maintain outdated business processes, so a lot of folks who say, we're just going to do a technical upgrade and minimize costs and get it over with. Well, all that stuff, you're just bringing up outdated business processes when you do that. Allow process owners to defer key business decisions to IT. Port over security configuration with no review or optimization. Conduct minimal testing without user involvement. Again, as you guys all know, the focus needs to be on testing and retesting and an iterative testing cycle and get into implementation. Maintaining customizations to previous versions of standard objects rather than retrofit to new version. So we talked a little bit about that, and having an environments plan that accounts for that, making sure you understand the standard objects that have been changed. Retrofit all custom reports regardless of priority to the business. Again, you need to, that's a negative, right? You need to take a look at all those reports and understand if they're even being used or how important they are. There needs to be a priority. And they utilize a methodology that isn't conducive to upgrade projects. I say that because sometimes I've talked to some people at conferences and say they've done an upgrade, and instead of taking an upgrade methodology, they've utilized what we would term an implementation methodology. And by that I mean they have like a plan, design, develop or build, test, train, roll out, and support. They're taking that type of approach to an upgrade, and it's just not conducive to that. Objects created, and copied from standard objects. Remember that, a lot of times your customizations, if you've copied those from a standard object and you name it correctly, you name it R55 whatever or P55 whatever, you need to remember to change the system code. Little things like that. A lot of times people make those changes, but they leave the system code as 42 for sales order. And then there's a problem with the merge. So you need to remember that even the system code has to change on those. There's little things like that I know people have struggled with. And a communication and change management strategy. I think that's another thing that folks have struggled with. And again, you mitigate that by getting your end users and your business more involved in the process. So it's not just an IT project. As far as the right side, the easy path upgrade, net change training. Again, I can't say enough good things about JD Tips. Providing custom net change training for clients. They will actually come to you to perform some of that to help the clients early in the process identify potential opportunities for improvements. Setting up a demo environment as early as possible. Conducting multiple mock go-lives. Again, so we talk about the companies that have succeeded in these go-lives. They've done that, right? They've taken a mock go-live maybe 3 months before go live, maybe again a month and a half before go live, and they've gone through the process, done testing, got users involved. Before that actually, before it's not just a big bang at the time of the go live or the cutover. Optimize and analyze your data. I think we've talked about that enough. Validate the business requirements with business process owners and key users. Placing a heavy focus on end user training, even where business processes haven't changed. So again, depending on the release you're going to, from World E1 definitely, but even E1 to E1, there's some GUI changes. And, a tool we have found basically, that's been very invaluable to us in the process is UPK, so User Productivity Kit. We have definitely taken a more, taken better advantage of the UPK tool, not only from a training, but a user procedures, standard operating procedures. Now that, and then if you don't, for those that don't have UPK and you want it, you can easily procure that tool and get that incorporated now before you do your upgrade. That's a tool that continues to get good feedback out in the industry. And complete the upgrade blueprint. So we talked about that earlier. I alluded to it, how you start out with pain points, but then you end up with a blueprint, which is really your strategy that guides your upgrade. That you address during the project. There's certain items that were pain points at one point that you're going to say, hey, that's going to stay the same. The software doesn't fix that issue. Or there's things you say, yes, we can address this in the upgrade, or no, we can address it, but it can't be a part of this upgrade initiative. We need to kind of table that. That's a larger chunk of work. It needs to be a post-go-live or post-upgrade initiative. Complete the impact assessment again. We talked about it's really a smaller chunk of work that can talk through what happens to all your interfaces, your conversions, your enhancements, your reports. Multiple rounds of iterative testing, unit integrated user acceptance and stress testing. Review custom report lists with the users to identify the reports to be retrofit versus reports to be removed. And utilize the resources that are out there. There's JD Tips, My Oracle support. There's documents that Oracle has put together that help improve the strategy you can apply to your project. Okay, so again, we're seeing the upgrade process, upgrade planning phase is derailed sometimes when you don't do those pre-upgrades. So, and all that will impact all these things you see on the actual upgrade. So there was a question that came up, and it's a good transition into slide 16, where you'll see we talk about, this is an upgrade methodology that we utilize. We're happy to share it on this just to show, because it's, again, it's one of the questions was explain more on the upgrade methodology compared to the implementation. Well, in implementation, usually you're starting from ground zero, so to speak. You have to come up with requirements for the business, and then you have to design or configure the system to meet those requirements. Then you have to build the extensions or the enhancements that need to be done or the reports, and then you test against those use cases or those requirements, and then you train and roll out support. You know, the typical, that's an implementation. A methodology is a little different in that we need to evaluate and plan, and so you'll see the three main sections across the top: evaluate and plan, upgrade and test, and transition and deploy. This is more what we would call an upgrade-specific methodology, where, again, some of the things we've talked about on the left in evaluate and plan, you see the impact assessment. We're developing a business case, and again, that's why are we upgrading? What's our return on investment? Developing a communication strategy and plan. We're also we're doing the customization analysis. We're doing the end user surveys, things like that. And then when you get into the upgrade test, this is really more, an upgrade is more of an iterative testing where we actually migrate, perform multiple mock conversions. The more, the better. As you'll see, as you get into the upgrade test section, when it gets into 6, 7, and 8, you do an upgrade path testing, but then you optimize. So each time we do that, we go back and test again. And we do that initially because we're bringing over the majority of things that you have today that you haven't weeded out. And you bring those over, and so you do the testing, which is 6, 7, and 8. And then after you get comfortable with that, then you add 9 and 10, which are our new module configuration, any new functionality, any new modules, or any just new processing options, any of that new stuff that we want to add value. That's when we test those things. We add those in, test them again, and then we create what we call an upgrade playbook. That then transitions us into the third phase, which is called transition and deploy, where you see the items shaded there in blue for 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. So it's just a little different. I mean, you don't want to, in other words, you don't want to get bogged down in a design phase. You want to take more of an impact assessment approach to an upgrade, whereas in an implementation or a net new project, you're actually focusing on how do we make this get us off a legacy and meet our needs. So this is our approach. If you go to the next slide, you'll see, again, I break those down into 3 phases. I'll be brief since we just kind of went over it and we're getting close to our time here. But the 3 main events of the evaluating plan is you're going to evaluate business and technical capabilities. So in this case, you're going to understand the impact to the business on the upgrade and the impact on your infrastructure, and identify a plan for those RISE components. And you're going to complete an impact assessment. That's what we recommend, at least, where you understand the net change with the releases. You potentially do some net change training, that helps the users understand, and you complete that blueprint we talked about. That's where you actually complete the impact assessment and the blueprint, where you say, yes, we took all your pain points and we put them into a strategy that's going to be universally accepted throughout the business and IT. Here's our approach to the upgrade. That way it's objective. It's not subjective, right? It's not like nobody knows what this upgrade scope is. That blueprint guides that. The blueprint tells everybody, business or IT, this is exactly what we're upgrading. Here's a plan for all these pain points that you have. And that's been successful for us. We didn't always do that on our upgrades, and I wish we did. So on the next slide, you'll see the upgrade and test. Again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, similar to an implementation methodology, you do set up test scripts. You do have validation. But you have what we call upgrade pass testing. So you will have iterative cycles where you test up. Again, we recommend a couple mock cycles as well. We're actually doing the actual merge. You're actually doing the migration and doing testing. So it's not as much in a sandbox type of testing environment. This is an actual mock conversion. and then conducting those inter-testing cycles. We say validation testing, integrated testing, user acceptance testing, performance. The ideal way to do that is to establish a QA or a regression test environment that you can take advantage of. You don't have to have that, but that is the best practice. Okay, and we'll go to the next one. The last phase of the upgrade methodology that we have is transition and deploy. So prepare the training environment and focus on those things like Seth mentioned that are important. There is a whether you're E1 to E1 or World D1, both of them have user interface issues that need to be trained. And then we mentioned there the dress rehearsal or mock cutover. Okay.
I'll be pretty brief on this slide. I know we're getting short on time, and Greg's really already gone through identify the existing customizations to be retrofit. One gotcha there that some clients have run into is that a lot of times your custom indexes on standard tables do not migrate up, and they need to be given a little bit of extra attention. So just something to keep in mind there. And although we know it's a no-no and people shouldn't do it, there are always some customizations that have been made to standard objects, and it's often hard to identify which those ones are without doing quite a bit of research. So keep in mind if there's any customizations you made to standard objects, if that's taken into account. And work with the business owners as you go through this process to determine which customizations are still needed and need to be retrofit. And you'll notice that's kind of a theme throughout, because it's always nice to be able to get rid of those where you can and use the native functionality. So the retrofit your customizations to objects in the new release is really somewhat of a decision point. There needs to be a decision made on objects of whether you're going to take an existing object, say inventory adjustments that was modified in version 8.9, and move that version up into a new environment, say 9.0, or if you're going to take the new version out of the 9.0 environment and retrofit the changes. Now, I think we would tell you the vast majority of the time you want to retrofit to the new, the most recent version of that object rather than take it from an old environment. But every so often there might be a case where it just makes sense to stick with the old. So it's a good decision point to keep in mind. As we mentioned, you have to redevelop your world writers, dream writers, and fasters. You want to take a look at removing any outdated or unneeded versions of your interactive or batch versions so you don't clutter up a new system with outdated versions that maybe have the wrong naming convention or are no longer being used or created one time for a bug fix or something along those lines. As we mentioned several times, you want to take advantage of any new functionality offered that's available if you can. And you really need to use this as an opportunity to review and optimize your security, especially if you're going from a world menu-based security to E1 rule-based. It's a great opportunity to look at your SOX controls and make sure that you don't have any conflicts, and to really take a hard look at who has access to what and why. I'll give you an example. We worked with a client at one point who, out of about 80% of their users had access to create new items and modify in the item master, because over time they had just taken existing roles and copied them and hadn't really noticed that, hey, we've given almost everyone in the company now a pretty good ability here that should really be limited to a very small group. And this is a good opportunity to take a look at that. And there's tools out there you can look at. QSoft is one that we've seen quite often, and that you can use to help manage that and identify conflicts and help get your security the way it needs to be, so you've got not only what the users need to be able to do, but the appropriate controls in the system. And it's a good opportunity to assess data browser access. As I mentioned earlier, it's much more functional now than UTB or the DBU was in the past. It has security that you can apply. It gives you the export capabilities, and it's something that we're seeing more and more often that clients are giving to super users and selected users to go out there and look for the additional data they need, rather than, say, customize a grid. For example, if you need access to the container ID in the sales order table, well, it doesn't show up on the grid. Well, you can either modify the business view in that grid to pull it on, or you can give them access to the data browser to go directly out to the 4210 or 4211 and pull it up there. So it's just another decision point that needs to be thought about and decided upon.
So we're getting close to the end here. The next few slides are just summary, and we'll kind of scroll through those. Really, the slide that has the easy path and the hard path up again. It's really some minor changes to this, but they're the ones we've gone over before. Key thing is get the business involved in this. Don't go at it alone. Make sure it's not just an IT project. There's several tools that we've talked about that you might want to talk further about the survey, the customization analysis, those tools, the impact assessment. You can reach out to me or Seth or anyone at JD Tips, and we'll be happy to follow back up with you. And this presentation we will publish as well. As far as upgrade success factors, on the next slide, next slide has just some things we feel is best practices for optimal results. Again, we can talk more about those. And then just as a segue, I'll be brief on MarketSphere for those that don't know us. We are an Oracle Platinum partner specialized in JD Edwards. We're also specialized in the other Oracle products. We've done many ERP implementations and upgrades, successful Hyperion planning, forecasting, financial management implementations, and several successful BI, OBIE, Essbase, business intelligence implementations. Our background is on some of these slides. We have offices, really 11 different offices that are listed there: Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Indianapolis, Kansas City, New York, Omaha, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. But we do work all over the country and wherever our clients have work, even if that means international. But one thing I did want to add is that we do have an event at Open World for those of you that are going to Open World. And we're actually going to talk more about upgrades on Tuesday out at Open World, and I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you to that. It's going to be at Annabelle's Bistro on Tuesday, October 4th. And if you don't like the box lunch that are always so great that you get at the conferences, feel free to come over and leave the box lunch behind and come over and have lunch with us, and we'll talk more about JD Edwards and upgrades and maybe some of these tools. And you can email me at greg.davis@marketsphere.com. Also, we have an event at the Americano patio, and that's on Tuesday night from 7:30 to 10 p.m. You can RSVP to me at, again, greg.davis@marketsphere.com. So happy to have you. I hope this is informational for you and educational, and it added value to your upgrade planning or upgrade project initiative. And Andy, I think, at any time anybody wants to reach out to me for more information, they can.
Okay. Thanks, Greg and Seth. This is Andy again. I just wanted to say one comment. My phone was muted before accidentally, but I just wanted to say that, we've been doing consulting for 11 years in addition to all the other things that we do, like training and publishing JD Tips Journal. So it was a big deal for us to decide that we needed to select a domestic U.S.-based consulting partner to help with upgrades and major implementation projects. And I think it's clear that MarketSphere is going to be a great partner for us, and I think that they will do an excellent job at all of our clients. So I encourage you to contact either one of us if you need help with an upgrade. So with that, I'd like to say thanks to everyone, and we'll see you hopefully on one of the future webcasts. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.